Imagine a crime scene sealed off by yellow tape. The air thick with silence, cameras flashing, investigators whispering. And then the discovery. Fingerprints. Not just anyone's, but the fingerprints of a man who once held the highest office. In the land, Donald Trump. Suddenly, what was whispered in back rooms, what was dismissed as rumor, explodes into the daylight. The Epstein cover-up, once shrouded in secrecy, is now tied to the one man who always claimed he was untouchable. This isn't just about one scandal, one case, one billionaire predator hiding in plain sight. This is about power so corrupt, bends reality itself. For years, Trump's defenders laughed off the connections, spun the narrative, drowned truth in a sea of distractions. But here's the picture no one can spin away. Evidence that points to him, as if the walls of justice themselves were crying out, enough. And then, into this heavy silence, steps a voice. Calm, clear, and unafraid. Representative Jasmine Crockett. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't bow to the weight of money, fame, or the roar of MAGA loyalists. Her words cut through the fog like a blade. Trump's fingerprints are all over the Epstein cover-up. The room freezes, because in that single sentence lies the collapse of every excuse. Every denial, every smug smirk of untouchable privilege. It's the kind of moment that makes history feel alive, dangerous, electric. A moment that dares the audience you too. Lean in closer, because you sense you are not just hearing a statement, you're witnessing a reckoning. Crockett's voice doesn't tremble, it strikes like thunder. And as it echoes, you feel the weight of generations of immigrants who sacrificed. Women who fought to be believed, young people demanding a future free of predators and power, converging on this instant, because when corruption wears a suit and tie, when it hides behind towers and gold-plated facades, it doesn't expect to be called out by someone who cannot be bought, who cannot be silenced. But here it is, the cover. Ripped open, the lie exposed, the truth spoken out loud, and yet this is only the first crack in the dam. The real flood is still to come. Because as the layers of this scandal peel back, the truth becomes far darker than anyone imagined. Why does this moment matter so much? Because what's at stake isn't just the reputation of one disgraced billionaire or even one former president. It's the very question of whether justice in America still belongs to the people, or if it has been sold off to the highest bidder. The Epstein cover-up isn't a tabloid scandal. It's a mirror reflecting the ugliest truths about how power operates in the shadows. For years, Americans have been told to trust the system, to believe that no one is above the law. Yet time after time, when the rich and well-connected face exposure, the rules bend, the files vanish, the witnesses fall silent. Epstein's death in custody didn't just raise eyebrows, set off alarms. A man with connections to presidents, princes and CEOs, suddenly gone, taking with him the names, the evidence, the accountability. And who benefited most from that silence? The very elites who swore they were uninvolved. Among them, Donald Trump. Trump has always branded himself as untouchable, as the man who could say or do anything and walk away unscathed. His power has been his shield, his celebrity a cloak that turns scandal into spectacle. But beneath the glitz of reality TV and gold-plated walls lies a man who has mastered one thing above all, escaping consequences. This is why Crockett's words land with such force, by tying Trump directly to the cover-up. She doesn't just name a scandal, she punctures the myth of invincibility. And it's not just about Trump. It's about every American who has ever wondered if their voice mattered, if the truth mattered, if justice mattered. Because if the most powerful can abuse the system without consequence, what does that mean for everyone else? That's the quiet dread that haunts this story. That's why people are leaning forward, holding their breath, wondering what comes. Next, the internet reacts instantly. Hashtags surge. Memes capture Crockett's unflinching stare. Twitter lights up. If this doesn't shake America awake, nothing will. On TikTok, young activists remix her words into rallying cries, their captions filled with fire emojis and the demand for accountability. On Instagram, threads appear. Finally, someone said it. For millions watching, Crockett becomes more. Then a congresswoman, she becomes a symbol of defiance in the face of corruption, so bold it believed itself untouchable. Contrast that with Trump's defenders scrambling on cable news, or excuses sounding thinner with every breath. No evidence, they stammer. No connection. But the public can feel the panic in their tone. The cover-up is being dragged into the light, and with it, the myth of invincibility begins to unravel, and so the stakes rise. Because this isn't just a political fight, it's a cultural reckoning, a test of whether truth still has power in a country drowning in lies. Crockett knows the risks. To speak this truth is to invite attacks, smear campaigns, threats, yet she stands tall. Because someone has to. The question now hangs in the air. Heavy and urgent, can the truth survive against the machinery of corruption, or will power smother it once again? And just when the cover-up seemed airtight, a crack began to form. To understand why Trump's fingerprints on the Epstein cover-up strike with such force, you have to go back, because Donald Trump's story has always been the story of a man who learned early that rules were for other people. For him, life was a stage, wealth was the set design, and arrogance was the script. He was born not into struggle, but into insulation, a tower of privilege, built to shield him from accountability. And from the very beginning, he perfected the art of bending the system until it broke. The scandals didn't arrive late in life. They were baked into the foundation. Discrimination lawsuits in the 1970s, when his family real estate empire was accused of denying housing to black tenants. Trump didn't apologize, didn't reflect. He fought it with lawyers, with bravado, with spin. The message was clear. The truth didn't matter, only the performance. And it worked. Money bought silence. Lawyers bought loopholes. The cycle began. As the years passed, the pattern became unmistakable. Casinos that crumbled under debt while Trump walked away richer. Contractors stiffed on payments, left bankrupt while Trump rebranded the loss as strategy. Each failure, each scandal, somehow transformed into a story of his genius. He surrounded himself with enablers, fixers, lawyers, sycophants, people willing to absorb the shame so long as the checks cleared. Trump didn't just evade consequences. He thrived on it, as though every scandal was proof of his superiority. And then came the women. Pageant contestants, employees, journalists' voices rising with allegations of harassment, assault, exploitation. Each time, the machine kicked in. Threats, settlements, public smears. Victims were painted as liars, opportunists, nobodies. Trump's wealth became a weapon, his celebrity a shield. The more people he hurt, the stronger the myth of his invincibility grew. The public began to see him not as a man vulnerable to justice, but as a man above it. That illusion would one day make the Epstein scandal all the more haunting, because Epstein was not just another name in Trump's orbit. He was the embodiment of the same disease. Wealth cloaked in charm, power built on exploitation, a life propped up by silence. Trump once called Epstein a terrific guy who liked women. On the younger side. Later, when Epstein's crimes became impossible to ignore, Trump tried to rewrite history, insisting he barely knew him. But the photos, the guest lists, the memories told another story. Trump and Epstein weren't strangers. They were reflections of each other, men who believed the rules could never touch them. And what of the victims? The women silenced, the girls whose stories were buried beneath non-disclosure agreements in fear. Their lives stood in stark contrast to Trump's golden towers. While he basked in applause and luxury, they carried invisible scars. For every gala he attended, there was a young woman living in shadows. For every magazine cover, there was a survivor unheard. The imbalance was grotesque, obscene, and intentional. Because in Trump's world, silence was currency, and he knew exactly how to buy it. This is what makes the cover-up so chilling. It wasn't an accident, a slip, a bureaucratic failure. It was a natural extension of Trump's life. When truth threatens, bury it. When victims speak, discredit them. When the walls close in, find a way out. And time after time, he succeeded. It's not because he was clever, but because the system was rigged to serve men like him. Epstein may have been the scandal, but Trump was the blueprint. Yet corruption is never invincible. It feeds on secrecy, but it cannot survive forever in the light. For decades, Trump's arrogance grew unchecked, each escape convincing him that consequences were for other people. But corruption has a way of breeding its own downfall, and Jasmine Crockett was about to expose it. Before Jasmine Crockett's voice shook the halls of Congress, before her words made headlines and ignited the internet, there was a young woman who knew what it meant to fight uphill battles with nothing but grit and stubborn faith. Her story doesn't begin in gilded towers or private jets. It begins in modest neighborhoods, in classrooms where doubt hung heavy, in moments where the easiest choice would have been silence. But silence was never an option for her. Jasmine Crockett grew up watching what resilience looked like in real time. Her parents, like so many hardworking families, carried more burdens than opportunities, but they carried them with dignity. They taught her that dignity wasn't about wealth or recognition, it was about standing tall when life tried to shrink. That lesson stuck. It became the heartbeat of everything she would do. From a young age, Jasmine was a fighter. She didn't inherit privilege. She inherited persistence. While Trump learned that money could erase mistakes, Jasmine learned that mistakes could become teachers. She worked harder, studied longer, demanded more of herself than the world ever expected of her. Law school wasn't handed to her on a silver platter, was wrestled from long nights, sacrificed weekends, and a belief that justice wasn't an abstract idea, but something real people needed every single day. As a lawyer, Jasmine Crockett stood where most politicians never have. Shoulder to shoulder with people society tries to erase. She represented those who had no one else. From low-income families to marginalized communities, brutalized by a system that treated them as expendable. She didn't shy away from the hardest cases. She took them because she knew every voice mattered. Even when the world acted like it didn't, each case was another reminder that the powerful weren't always right, and the powerless weren't always destined to lose. Her work wasn't glamorous, it wasn't lucrative, it was exhausting, but it was necessary. In every courtroom where she held her ground, every client who finally felt seen, forged in her the steel that would one day be tested on the national stage. Jasmine Crockett became the lawyer who refused to flinch, the advocate who refused to be bullied into silence. That same spirit propelled her into politics. She didn't run for Congress because it was convenient. She ran because she was tired of watching the same tired cycle of corruption suffocate the people she served. Was tired of a system where men like Trump played by their own rules while everyday Americans paid the price. For her, Congress wasn't about climbing the ladder of power, it was about flipping the ladder so more people could climb with her. And make no mistake, it wasn't easy. She was underestimated, dismissed, told she was too bold, too unpolished, too unwilling to play the game. But Jasmine knew the game was rigged, and she had no interest in learning how to lose politely. Instead, she embraced her identity, her fire, her unapologetic voice. She represented not just herself, but every immigrant family that sacrificed for opportunity. Every woman told to shrink herself. Every young person who wondered if politics could ever truly serve them. In her rise, Crockett became more than a politician, she became a symbol. Her very presence in the halls of power challenged the arrogance of men like Trump. Where he flaunted privilege, she embodied perseverance. Where he silenced victims, she amplified them. Where he treated democracy like a stage prop, she treated it like a sacred trust. And yet, her journey wasn't defined only by defiance. It was defined by faith, faith that truth still mattered, faith that dignity could outlast deceit, faith that America could be more than a playground for the powerful. That faith would be tested when she found herself face to face with the embodiment of everything she had fought against her entire life. For Crockett, confronting Trump wasn't just political theater, it was personal history colliding with national destiny. She had seen what unchecked power did to ordinary families. She had seen the devastation when the system looked the other way. And so, when she stood on that floor and declared his fingerprints were all over the Epstein cover-up, it wasn't just a statement. It was the culmination of every late night, every courtroom battle, every moment of sacrifice that shaped her, because her life had prepared her for this confrontation. Her refusal to be intimidated wasn't born in that instant. It had been forged years earlier, in every trial she had already endured. She was the underdog who never forgot who she was fighting for. She was the voice that refused to crack in, the face of arrogance. She was the proof that America's promise doesn't belong to the privileged few, but to everyone bold enough to demand it. And so, the stage was set. The privileged elite who believed he was untouchable, and the relentless truth seeker who had nothing to lose but her silence. Two forces, worlds apart in background, values, and purpose, hurtling toward an inevitable collision. No one expected what would happen when these two forces collided in full view of the nation. The chamber was restless, the kind of restlessness that comes before a storm. Cameras zoomed in, pens hovered over notepads. Staffers leaned forward as though they could already sense that something unforgettable was about to unfold. On one side, Trump's allies filled the air with noise, loud, defensive, combative. They hurled accusations like confetti, hoping the sheer volume would drown out the truth. Baseless. One shouted, "Witch hunt." Another sneered, a third leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is nothing but political theater." They were desperate to frame the moment as spectacle, to paint Crockett as an angry disruptor rather than a truth-teller. They revealed something more dangerous: fear. Every insult, every shouted deflection was less about strength and more about panic. And then there was Crockett. She didn't shout, she didn't scramble. Shoulders squared, eyes unwavering. The contrast was cinematic. Chaos against calm, bluster against composure. Where her opponents used noise, she used silence, letting their frantic words echo and collapse under their own emptiness. It wasn't just what she said, it was what she refused to give them. They wanted her rattled. She gave them serenity. They wanted her defensive. She gave them certainty. The room shifted. Viewers at home could feel it too. The duel wasn't being fought on equal terms. Trump's defenders looked like men drowning, grasping at straws, while Crockett looked like a woman standing firmly on solid ground. She leaned forward, finally breaking the silence with measured precision. If this were truly baseless, why? Is the panic so loud? The chamber froze. One line calm, piercing, undeniable, cut sharper than 1,000 shouted accusations. The allies flinched. One tried to recover, insisting she was chasing conspiracy theories. Another waved papers theatrically, hoping distraction would substitute for substance. But every move they made exposed their fragility. Crockett didn't need to interrupt or raise her voice. She let their overconfidence curdle into visible desperation. The duel unfolded like a drama. Each time they lunged, she sidestepped with facts. Each time they roared, she answered with a quiet but devastating truth. Words became weapons. But Crockett's restraint turned silence into the deadliest blade of all, for the audience watching both in the room and across the country. The polarity couldn't have been clearer. Trump's allies looked like caricatures of arrogance, men rattled by the presence of a woman who refused to shrink. Crockett, by contrast, looked unshakable, as though every ounce of her journey had prepared her for this precise moment, and beneath the theatrics, the sense that the untouchable myth of Trump was starting to crack. His defenders were no longer dictating the narrative. They were reacting, scrambling, cornered by the very truth they claimed didn't exist. You could almost feel the temperature rising, the walls closing in. Crockett didn't need to gloat or grandstand. Her composure alone exposed the weakness in their bluster. Every second that passed tilted the duel further in her favor. The chamber was no longer restless. It was tense, electric, a collective inhale, waiting for the blow that everyone sensed was coming. Crockett's calm wasn't just composure, it was foreshadowing. She was holding something back, waiting for the exact moment to strike with precision. And then Crockett dropped the line that turned the entire room upside down. The silence after Crockett's poised calm was heavy, almost unbearable. The chamber had become a stage, the country and audience leaning forward in collective anticipation. Trump's allies had exhausted their arsenal of noise, shouting, sneering, deflecting him, yet none of it landed. And that's when Crockett stood, her voice steady, her presence commanding, and delivered the moment that would echo far beyond the walls of Congress. She began softly, almost conversationally, letting the weight of her words carry instead of volume. We are not here today to debate hypotheticals. We're here because the truth has fingerprints. Fingerprints that point directly to the one man who has spent his entire life pretending the rules do not apply to him. A ripple went through the room. You could feel it in the stillness of the air, the subtle shifting of bodies unprepared for what was about to unfold. Crockett let the pause linger, refusing to be rushed. Then, with precision, she began to lay out the case. Donald Trump once called Jeffrey Epstein a terrific guy, not a stranger, not an acquaintance. A terrific guy. Their names appear together on guest lists. Their photos plastered across the internet show them smiling, relaxed, comfortable. And when Epstein's crimes became undeniable, Mr. Trump suddenly claimed he hardly knew him. But history, unlike lies, leaves a record. Gasps punctuated her words. Even reporters seasoned to cynicism leaned forward, pens scratching furiously to capture each sentence. On social media, where the hearing streamed live, comments flooded in. She's saying what we all knew, but no one dared to say. Crockett didn't rush. She layered each revelation like bricks building a wall, too strong to topple. When Epstein faced accountability, when survivors finally saw a path to justice, what happened? The system buckled, okay? Evidence vanished. Testimonies were sealed. And then, in a federal prison where cameras mysteriously failed, Epstein turned up dead. The silence was deafening. The only people who benefited from that silence were the very elites who feared what his testimony might reveal. And who among them stood to lose the most? Donald Trump. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Trump's allies shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting, jaws tightening. One tried to interject, but the chair's gavel silenced him. Crockett pressed on, voice unwavering. Let us be clear, she continued. This is not a witch hunt. Is not theater. This is the pursuit of truth that victims were denied for far too long. And when we talk about cover-ups, we are not talking about rumors whispered in tabloids. We are talking about deliberate, systemic efforts to protect men like Trump from facing consequences for the company they kept, the actions they enabled, and the victims they silenced. Every word felt like a stone hurled against the fragile glass of Trump's invulnerability. With each stone, cracks spread wider. Crockett leaned forward, her tone sharpening. When Epstein died, people said justice died with him, but fingerprints remain, and Donald Trump's fingerprints are all over this cover-up. The room froze. It wasn't just an accusation, it was a strike at the heart of the myth. The man who built his empire on untouchability had just been tied to one of the darkest scandals in modern memory. The reaction was immediate. Gasps. Shock. The sound of reporters' keyboards clattering. In overdrive. On Twitter, the clip was already going viral. Trump's fingerprints are all over this cover-up. Representative Jasmine Crockett just made history. Within minutes, hashtags began trending, memes sprouted, and the internet became an echo chamber of outrage and vindication. Meanwhile, Trump's allies looked rattled. I sat back, eyes narrowing, lips pressed into a thin line. Another shuffled papers as if searching desperately for a rebuttal. Third leaned toward his microphone, only to realize there were no words strong enough to counter what had just been unleashed. Their overconfidence evaporated, leaving only the raw, unpolished fear of men realizing the tide had turned against them. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her composure was itself a victory, proof that dignity could dismantle arrogance. She turned her focus outward, addressing not just the chamber, but the millions watching at home. This is not just about Donald Trump, she said, her tone widening into something larger, something universal. This is about whether America will choose to believe the powerful or the survivors, whether we will let money bury truth, or whether we will stand with those who were told their pain didn't matter. If we fail here, if we look away, then we tell every victim in this country that justice was never meant for them. In that instant, Crockett transformed from Congresswoman to conscience. She embodied the outrage of survivors, the frustration of citizens weary of corruption, the hope of those who still believed America could live up to its promises. The climax was unmistakable. She raised her voice just enough for the words to strike like a hammer. No more cover-ups. No more silence. Donald Trump's fingerprints are there for the world to see, and no amount of money, privilege, or bluster will erase them. A chamber erupted, not in applause, not in cheers, but in the stunned silence of people realizing they had just witnessed history's shift. And just like that, Crockett sat back, her expression calm, unshaken. Her words lingered like smoke, impossible to ignore. It's impossible to erase, because this was not just a moment. It was a spark. The fallout didn't stop in that room, it ignited across the nation. The words had barely left Crockett's lips when the first wave hit. Within seconds, phones buzzed across the chamber. Reporters scrambled to push alerts. Producers in newsrooms barked orders to cut live feeds. On Twitter, the clip shot like lightning across timelines. By the time Crockett sat down, hashtags were already trending. Hashtag CrockettVs, Trump. Hashtag fingerprints, DONT, lie. Hashtag justice for survivors. The internet devoured the moment with a hunger years in the making. Memes exploded, side-by-side images of Trump's smug grin next to Crockett's steady glare. Captions like arrogance meets accountability. TikTok creators remixed her mic drop into rap verses, gospel sermons, even cinematic slow motion. Edits. On Instagram, reels of her calm delivery set against dramatic music racked up millions of views in hours. But it wasn't just memes. Survivors groups began posting statements of gratitude. For too long, we've been ignored. Today, someone finally said it out loud. Young activists flooded comment sections. This is why we vote. This is why we fight. It felt less like a political moment and more like a cultural earthquake. Cable networks scrambled to keep up. On one channel, a panel of conservative commentators looked visibly shaken, fumbling excuses that landed with a thud. "She's grandstanding," one muttered, his voice betraying more desperation than conviction. Another insisted, "There's no evidence," only to be interrupted by the host reading Crockett's exact quote. Trump's fingerprints are all over the Epstein cover-up. The panel fell into awkward silence. Meanwhile, on progressive outlets, commentators hailed it as the line of the year. A CNN anchor, nearly grinning, said, "This wasn't politics as usual. This was a seismic statement." On MSNBC, hashtags scrolled across the ticker as the host declared, "Crockett just redefined what fearless looks like, even late night." Comedians jumped in, their monologues peppered with jokes about Trump, scrambling to buy gloves big enough to hide his fingerprints. But perhaps the most telling reactions came from Trump's own allies. Normally brash and defiant, they began to retreat. A congressman who had shouted witch hunt earlier in the day avoided cameras entirely. Another issued a statement so vague it read more like a surrender than a defense. We should be focusing on the future, not the past. On Fox News, where Trump once reigned supreme, some hosts shifted the subject altogether, pivoting awkwardly to gas prices or border fear-mongering. The silence spoke louder than the noise ever could. Crockett, meanwhile, didn't need to say another word. She let the internet, the press, and the public carry her message further than she ever could on her own. Her face became a symbol, her quote a rallying cry. Students scribbled it on protest signs, activists printed it on t-shirts. Within 24 hours, "Fingerprints Don't Lie" was trending worldwide. For progressives, it felt like validation. For years, they had watched Trump dance past scandal after scandal, his arrogance rewarded with headlines, but never accountability. Crockett's statement pierced that myth. Social media was flooded with messages like, "Finally, someone stood up and told the truth without fear." Immigrants shared posts tying her courage to their own struggles. "We know what it means to be silenced. Crockett speaks for us." Black women especially amplified the moment. proud to see one of their own standing, so firm against a machine built to silence them. The ripple effects didn't stop online. Commentators predicted her words would be studied in political science. Classes, quoted in campaign ads, replayed in documentaries. Some even whispered about the future. Could this be the spark that propels her into national leadership? For the first time in a long time, progressives felt like the story belonged to them, not to Trump's spectacle. And yet, beneath the viral glory, a deeper current stirred. Because while Crockett's moment of truth had captured the nation, the questions it raised were darker than any meme could capture. If Trump's fingerprints were all over the Epstein cover-up, what else lay buried? Who else was complicit? How many others had benefited from the silence? The hashtags burned bright, but hashtags alone cannot bring justice. Survivors still waited. The system that bent for Epstein and Trump still stood. Crockett had ignited a fire. But would America be brave enough to let it burn through the rot? Or would it be smothered once again by the very elites she had just called out? The country buzzed with validation and outrage, pride and unease, unable to look away. The internet had spoken, but history's verdict was still unwritten. But beyond the viral moment, a deeper question haunted America. The days that followed. As the viral storm raged and the headlines multiplied, Jasmine Crockett stepped back into the spotlight, not to revel in victory, but to reframe it. She understood what too many politicians forget. A viral moment can ignite a fire, but only a moral compass can keep it burning. This isn't just about one man, she said, her voice carrying the quiet force of conviction. This is about who we are as a people. Do we want a country where corruption hides behind money and privilege? Or do we want a country where dignity still means something? The chamber grew still. Across television screens and live streams, her words carried like a sermon. Crockett wasn't only speaking about Trump or Epstein. She was naming the larger battle: justice versus privilege, truth versus deception, the people versus the powerful. She turned the scandal into a mirror, forcing America to see itself and ask what it truly valued. Justice cannot only belong to those who can afford it, she continued. Democracy cannot only serve those who exploit it. If our system protects predators and silences survivors, then it is not democracy at all. It is theater. And I refuse to let this stage continue without rewriting the script. The rhetoric was powerful, but it was more than rhetoric. It was rooted in her lived experience. She spoke not as a polished careerist, but as someone who had walked beside the ignored, the dismissed, the forgotten. That authenticity transformed her words into something larger than politics. Social media amplified the message yet again. Hashtags shifted from outrage to affirmation. Hashtag dignity over corruption. Hashtag justice is American. Hashtag we stand with Crockett. Teachers played her speech in classrooms. Faith leaders quoted her in Sunday sermons. Parents shared clips with their children saying, "This is what courage looks like." And Crockett didn't let the moment rest on her shoulders alone. Reminded Americans that this fight was collective. "I am one voice," she declared, "but every one of you carries the same responsibility. Every time you speak truth, every time you demand accountability, you chip away at corruption's armor. Together, we can make sure dignity is not a relic of the past, but the heartbeat of our future." Her words transcended the scandal itself. Trump and Epstein became less important than the larger narrative. The eternal battle between those who abuse power and those who refuse to be silenced. Crockett's stand reminded people that democracy is not automatic. It is something earned, defended, and renewed with every generation. The effect was cinematic. Viewers at home didn't just see a congresswoman. They saw the embodiment of what they wanted their country to be: fearless, principled, unwilling to bow to corruption. They saw the contrast as starkly as a movie scene. Trump as the embodiment of privilege unchecked. Crockett as the embodiment of dignity unyielding. And then came the universal crescendo. She closed not with anger, but with hope. The American story has always been written by those who dared to say no to kings, no to segregation, no to silence. Today, we say no to corruption. And tomorrow, we must say yes to dignity, to justice, to the truth that will outlive us all. The chamber erupted, not in applause alone, but in a sense of shared gravity. For once, politics felt less like theater, and more like destiny. Crockett's words left the nation with a choice that could no longer be ignored, and for millions watching, the choice became crystal clear. The moment has passed, but its impact lingers. Donald Trump's facade of untouchability has been cracked, his denials drowned out by evidence, and by a voice that refused to be silenced. Jasmine Crockett stood not just for herself, but for millions who have been ignored, dismissed, or silenced. She reminded the nation that courage is contagious, that truth cannot be hidden forever. Every gesture, every word she spoke was a beacon for those who believe in justice over privilege, integrity over power, and dignity over corruption. Her stand against one of the most untouchable figures in modern history proves something essential. Change is possible when someone refuses to step back, when someone refuses to be afraid. And this is where you come in. This isn't just her story, it's ours. Share this message. Talk about it with friends, family, and colleagues. Let your voice join the chorus, demanding accountability, integrity, and justice. Subscribe to stay informed, to witness courage when it shows up, and to be part of a movement that refuses to let silence be the answer. Because when we amplify truth, we refuse to normalize corruption. When we stand together, nothing can stop us. Every share, every view, every conversation is another brick in the foundation of a more just America. Remember, history doesn't only remember the powerful, it remembers those who dared to speak when it mattered most. Just reminded us all what it looks like to stand tall in the face of the untouchable, because the truth may be buried for a time, but it always rises.